Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Community Liaison Committee, 25th of January 2022. I'm Councillor Sally Hanks, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. Before we start the meeting, can I remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing? Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raised hand function and we can all see that. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and to grab the attention of the chair or the democratic officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or the democratic officer know. If you have a webcam, then you could try turning this off, as this sometimes helps with the broadband or the Wi-Fi. So, housekeeping rules done. If we move on to the agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. I don't have any, but Amy, do you have any apologies, please?
I do, thank you, Chair. Apologies received only from our Town and Community Council representatives. Apologies from Councillor Weddell for Cowbridge Town Council, Mr Reid from Llangarn Community Council, Mr Smith from Llanmaes Community Council, and Mrs Marks from Mickleston-le-Pit and Leckwith Community Council. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2, we've got minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of October 2021 and the special meeting held on the 4th of November 2021. Has everybody read them, and can I take them as approved? If anybody's got any questions or alterations, could you please let me know? Otherwise, maybe I could have a proposer and a seconder for these minutes, please.
Bob Penrose, I propose the minutes to be accurate.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Gerwin-Thomas, thank you very much.
If I may, Chair, can I just confirm that we also have a seconder from the elected members of the council, please?
Sandra Perks, Councillor, did you offer your
Yes.
Yeah, lovely.
Yes,
I thought I saw it. Thank you. Agenda item 3, do I have any declarations of interest, please? From anybody? I can't see any indications, so I take that as a no. Agenda item 4, police matters. Can I ask Chief Inspector Arabella Rees, please, to give your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, everybody. So in relation to my report, I intend to go a very brief overview in terms of how we're looking in terms of crime across the Vale at the moment, and then a couple of key issues that are out over the course of the last couple of months since we last met to update everybody on. So in terms of crimes, looking at the period of the 1st of October to the 31st of December 2021 across the Vale, overall reported crime was down. It's approximately 6%, which equates to around about 120 crimes when compared to the same period in 2020. Some headlines within that. So violence with injury was up very slightly at 3.2%, but that equates to 6 crimes. Violence without injury had also increased, but again, only by 9 crimes. Stalking and harassment was down approximately 10%. And in relation to residential burglary, that was up by 11%, but that actually only equates to 6 additional crimes. And given that we saw fewer residential burglaries anyway during 2020 because of the various lockdowns and people being at home, that's actually quite a positive space to be in. Now, I mentioned burglaries there. Some of the councillors may be aware that immediately prior to Christmas, we had a spate of residential burglaries across Penarth, Wenvo, and then some parts of the rural Vale, and they happened over a very short time period. So I'm just very pleased to be able to inform you that 2 persons have been charged and remanded into prison in relation to those matters. One of those individuals have been charged with over 18 separate incidents. So a very positive outcome, and that'll go to trial then later on this year. I wanted to briefly mention e-scooters because I've had a number of queries in relation to it. So I want to give some clarity in terms of the position, because no doubt yourselves are having queries in relation to this as well, and then some of the bits that we're doing around it. So in relation to e-scooters, there's a real confusion in some areas around what is legal and what is not. So for absolute clarity, they cannot be ridden on public roads, pavements, parks or cycle lanes. However, they can be used on private land, but only with the landowner's permission. So if the police stop a person riding an e-scooter in a public place, the scooter can be seized and the individual is liable for prosecution. And parents can be prosecuted if they've allowed their child to ride an e-scooter, otherwise in accordance with the law. It's a common myth that e-scooters with a 5-mile-an-hour cap limit are allowed. It's not accurate. No e-scooters are allowed anywhere other than on private land with landowners' permission. We had quite a lot of complaints in relation to the use of e-scooters, especially around Penarth area. So our local neighbourhood policing teams there have conducted a number of e-scooter operations, and they've seized quite a number. And no doubt you may have seen some of those pictures on Facebook with our backyard absolutely full of them at the moment. It's been really well received, and I highlight it here because if any councillors are experiencing similar issues in other villages or towns across the Vale, then if you'd like to highlight that, we can put together a similar operation in order to combat that issue. The next matter I just wanted to raise was more in relation to the rural Vale. So in September 2021, we became aware that there was an upward trend in relation to hare coursing and lamping across the farmland in rural Vale, and that was resulting in criminal damage. So farmer machinery, crops, gates, and then animal welfare concerns. But whilst we had that upward trend, it was largely unreported, so we weren't necessarily seeing it in calls to police at the time that things were happening, or even in later calls, which meant that there were some concerns in our farming community that there was police inaction, or some presumptions that we knew, or perhaps we didn't know. So now that we identified that trend, our rural Vale neighbourhood policing team have been really proactive, and they've gone into partnership with some of the local farmers groups and the farming community to identify and tackle those rural crimes. There's been a very specific operation in place to face down those challenges, and what that's allowed us to do is really focus on encouraging reporting at the time when things are happening. And that actually meant that during October, so right off the back of that initial focus, we then had over 20 reports because we opened up that communication channel, which allowed us to then use intelligence and that information to direct our rural crime team, which is a team within South Wales Police, our special constabulary and our neighbourhood policing teams, along with specialist functions like drones or our road policing team, to the right places at the right time to try and stop those behaviours from happening. And as a consequence, the number of incidents that we're seeing have reduced, but the dialogue remains positive. And we're currently working with various different groups, such as the Glamorgan Smallholders, to do inputs around crime prevention, around reporting, and actually just really try and maintain that dialogue, both as we go through this winter season, but also ahead of next year. So looking ahead to next year, just to make you aware of some reassurance in terms of what we're looking at the moment, we have robust policing plans in place in anticipation of the easing of the COVID restrictions and the reopening of the nighttime economy, and also the Six Nations, which will be kicking off very soon. And we've also started, to the horror of some of my teams, we've started dusting off our summer plans already, even though we are in January, to get ourselves ready for the good weather, which, as we all know, could come as early as March. So we want to make sure that we have everything in place, lined up, ready to go to respond to that when we need to. So those are the operational issues that I wanted to bring up to date with. I also just want to make you aware that we're going to be having a change of leadership. So in November of last year, I was successful at the South Wales Police Superintendent promotion process. And I'm really pleased to be able to tell you that on my promotion, I'm going to be promoted to be head of operational policing for all of Cardiff and the Vale. So I'm only stepping over by one role, but I'll still have coverage of the Vale of Glamorgan. However, I won't be picking up that role until April 2023 because I'll be going on maternity leave very shortly, and I'll be off for that year until I come back. So for your reassurance, my deputy, and I think all the councillors should have contact details for him anyway, but if not, I'll share them over to Amy. Inspector McDean, who is the local policing inspector anyway for Penarth and Cardiff South, he will be temporarily promoted to cover me, and he does that routinely anyway. So he will take on my role for this next period until his promotion boards, and then they'll settle what that's going to look like for the next year. As said, Stuart's been covering for me anyway, on and off for the last year when I've been covering other roles, and I would like to think our communities haven't noticed at all, and I've got absolute confidence in him and the job that he will do. So with that in mind, I would, notwithstanding any questions, and I'm sure that won't change my mind, but I would just like to say thank you very much for all the councillors' support and really helpful, honest conversation that we've had over the course of last year to try and resolve any issues that you've experienced in your communities.
Ah, lovely. Thank you very much, Arabella, and many congratulations on your forthcoming happy event and on your new job as well. Exciting times ahead. So thank you for that report. Can I ask Councillor Mark Wilson, please, to ask his question?
Thank you very much. And also I'd like to repeat what the chair said about your excellent news, and well done. Anyway, and good luck with that. Okay, my questions are mostly about the website in particular. I accessed it today, and one of the issues I have is that when I accessed the local police team for Stanwell Ward, well, I got names, I got no email addresses, no phone numbers, and also I know information out of date. I know we got a new PCSO and the name is Luke, but you still got Leanne, and Leanne left about 4 months ago. And my concern is that obviously we need up-to-date information. Also, if, say, for instance, people want to report a crime, you refer to 999 and 101, but no other way of doing so, apart from people who are hard of hearing, obviously, and you got like a text thing. But I think that needs to be kind of updated as well. And perhaps maybe we can look at that. So those are my concerns, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson. So I share your concerns in relation to the updating of the contact details for the officers who have the specific wards. It is, I believe it was either the last meeting or the meeting before this was raised by, I don't know if it was yourself, Mr Wilson, or another councillor, but I have raised this into the centre because it does need to be upgraded at the point that those information changes. So I have highlighted the issue, and I know that it is being looked at. There's a transfer of systems going on at the moment within the back end, and I have a feeling it's because of a training provision that some material is not being updated. But then I would probably prefer for there to be no material than outdated material at that point. So I will take that back. In relation to the reporting mechanisms, we have a very busy functioning digital reporting desk at our public service centre, and I know that those details are within the South Wales Police website. Let me have a look in case they're not prominent in terms of the reporting, because again, as you say, we may be able to reflect those in other areas if it's not really got the prominence that it needs at the moment.
Okay, can I just come back on that? Because when it says about what reporting the crime, it only really gives you those options and that's it. And I think it needs to be looked at, you know. I mean, to be honest, the website, it looks quite accessible in some ways, but I just think for pertinent things like that, it needs to be strengthened so that people can report crimes much more easily. Because I know there are links, I've seen them myself, but the thing is, they're not accessible to the public. They need to be.
Okay. Let me have a look, and I will feed, if they're not there, I'll feed it back into our digital desk and our ICT team.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I ask Councillor Carroll, please, to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And may I echo the congratulations, Arabella, on both counts. It's just a quick question in relation to the e-scooters. Obviously, this has been quite a prominent issue in the national press, and it's very helpful for to have the update that you provided. It's just a question. Do you have any sort of graphics for social media that could perhaps be circulated with us? It's something that lots of us are on social media, and there are community groups, and if perhaps we could help you guys push them out, that would help make sure that everybody knows exactly what the rules are and that unless they're on private land, they shouldn't be using them?
I believe we do, because we've certainly put out a huge amount around prevention following some of these operations, and we were very surprised by the number that we seized and the number of concerns that are being put out. So we certainly do have educational material that we are putting out across our own social media channels. Whether that's a graphic or whether that is a written update, I'm not sure, but I can ask corporate communications to give me the details of that, because I can share that across to Amy, and then it'll have detailed within it exactly what the stipulations are, and that perhaps the councillors could share that in whatever view they would see fit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Sandra Perks, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll. My sentiments will be the same as the others. Arabella, very good luck for the up and coming arrival, and congratulations on your new job. I suppose I'm echoing what Councillor Mark Wilson said, in that I know that our PCSO has left. We had a very nice email from her to say that she was leaving her patch, and we'd be getting somebody new, but we don't know who the new person is. And again, we haven't got contact details. You know, even if we just wanted to, you know, sort of, we might not have a crime as such, but there could be things that are going on. Say, you know, people have told you there might be drug dealing going on or antisocial behaviour. So things that we want to pass on where we might not have a specific crime, it's difficult to do if we haven't got the contact details. Also, at one time, there used to be a sergeant's details on there beside the PCSOs. I don't know whether that was on an older site, but I just wondered whether something like that could be put on there as well, if possible.
So it used to be the case that you would have the sergeant, the neighbourhood police officers, and then you had the PCSOs via ward. It may well be that some of these are disappearing because of the upgrade that's going on at the moment, because that's going on in the back end. So information is dropping off, and it's just a bit of a slow process for the re-upgrade. My technical abilities are not so much that I want to guess which way that is, but when I feed that back into ICT and to our teams, I'll make sure that across the board they're looking at the information to make sure it gets updated.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Arabella, can I just ask 2 questions, please? What about hoverboards? Hoverboards, are they the same rules as e-scooters, or?
You're testing my roads policing knowledge here. I'm going to go with yes, because the principles of why e-scooters are not allowed onto public roads would be exactly the same as with hoverboards, because it's a safety issue and to do with insurance. So I will go with yes, but let me double check that to make sure I'm not leading you up a garden path. I can't say it's a complaint that we've had.
Okay.
Is there a specific area, Chair, that's causing a
no,
problem?
not really. It was just, I was just wondering if the, you know, the rules applied for both, really, and it seems like it would be sensible that they both would. And the other one, I was some months ago in the national press, there was county lines, and I haven't heard anything about county lines for some time, and I just wondered if that was better than it was. Just a bit of an update on that, please.
Okay, so county lines are where we see gangs or groups of people who will be affiliated to other groups of people anywhere else within either Wales or the UK, and it's generally linked to organised crime or drug supply. So in relation to county lines, they are still in existence, but the term county lines can often be used when it doesn't actually apply in regards to what we're actually seeing. So if I look at the Vale of Glamorgan, yes, there are pockets where we have issues in relation to drug use and drug supply, and I'm sure all councillors will have some of the issues without crossing their desks. But we are drilling into those the moment that we become aware of them. We've executed a number of warrants recently in Barry, not just in relation to drugs, but other organised crime in relation to other statutory partners, to stop that from happening and make sure that the Vale is seen as being a very hostile place for anybody who perhaps might be coming from out of areas trying to see it as a soft target location. So broadly, county lines exist. County lines have always existed across the UK, and this was a term that was given to them under a new piece of legislation. But locally, we're doing absolutely all that we can to stop the associated issues manifesting themselves in our communities, and we're not seeing those issues.
Oh,
industry partners to stop that from happening and make sure.
I'm not sure what's happening there. We've got an echo. I think everybody's muted, but lovely. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for your report, and wish you well. And we shall look forward to seeing your replacements. All right. Thank you ever so much. Bye bye. Okay, if we move on to agenda item 5. And we've got Christian Hadfield, and we can actually, well, I haven't heard him yet, but we can see him. So fingers crossed.
Well, you need to let me know if you lose me, and I'll turn my camera off.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening all. So just as a reminder, my name is Chris Hadfield. I'm responsible for the operational stations within the Vale of Glamorgan and Bridgend. That's 11 stations in total. And I've been doing this now for about 3 years. So what I'm proposing to do tonight is run through the operational elements, in particular for the Vale of Glamorgan, just to let you know how things have been going, certainly through the pandemic and where we are now. And I'll touch on some wider issues then that's just for your situational awareness more than anything. And of course, then I'll take some questions at the end. So if we look at the operational part for Vale of Glamorgan, there's 4 key strategic indicators that we use across the board, and those 4 indicators. One is road traffic collisions, the second one is accidental dwelling fires, third one is deliberate fire setting, and the final one is special service calls. So if you wonder what special service calls are, they're things like rescuing people from height, rescuing people below ground, and special rescue techniques in which Barry have got the capability to do that. It's really reassuring that looking at the statistics or the performance in the case of last year in comparison to this year, this year compared to last year, that everything is in a very stable position. All 4 key indicators for Vale of Glamorgan are down, which means that that's really healthy, and call rates are down for the Vale of Glamorgan. So obviously we've seen a dip in that during COVID, certainly for accidental dwelling fires. So I'm keeping a close eye on that to see how things pan out now. Things are starting to be opened up greater. But the actual operational statistics for Vale is particularly pleasing at the moment. In terms of what's happening in the Vale of Glamorgan right now, I reported last time that we were considering opening up our cadet program in Barry for our youngsters. We have now commenced that. We started that back in September, and even during the recent Christmas issues with COVID, we've still been able to maintain that service, even though some of it was for remotely. But now I can report all our cadets are back, which is really, really pleasing for the station. We're also, as a service, back into schools. So key stage 1 and 2 school visits are back in where we can, and working with the schools closely for managing risk assessments in terms of COVID. Where we can't get into schools, we're carrying out virtual talks. Where we missed out from last year, we're actually catching up with those the school children who we've missed out. We're going back to ensure that we've captured everybody, so we don't get a cohort that have missed out completely on our school visits. Which is really important for their understanding of fire. I also reported last year that Vale of Glamorgan saw a spike or a sudden increase in deliberate refuge fires. That now has completely stabilised. We haven't had any more hotspots since that time. And I just want to say thank you really to all the council and police and ourselves really for putting a small task and finish group together to work this one out and reduce those the fly tipping and deliberate fire setting. So that's again really, really good news. From our planning stages, so we're continuing planning year ahead. So this year we're looking at large scale exercises for 2022, and that's across all South Wales. But there's 2 sites in the Vale of Glamorgan that we will be using for large scale exercising. One being Barry Docks, where we're going to be hosting a water-related exercise with our other agencies, Coast Guard and others, and also a shipping fire exercise, which will probably be later in the year. And we'll also be utilising the decommissioned or the being decommissioned Aberthorpe Power Station It's a fantastic playground for our teams, especially our urban search and rescue team, where they can go along and play to their heart's content. In terms of wider service, I mentioned COVID. I think I reported on the last 2 occasions, our service delivery to not just the Vale of Glamorgan, but South Wales hasn't faltered during COVID. We've seen some obviously challenges with staffing issues, but we've managed to get that through our business continuity. And our operational staff at the moment are being used to support Welsh Ambulance Service, and we're currently helping out with a vaccination programme at local vaccination sites. And for your wider, just for the last one really, we are at the moment, or just closed our firefighter recruitment campaign for 2022. And I say 2022 because we're now going to be recruiting every year, mainly because of our retirement profile. And we've also just recruited now for our joint fire control team based in South Wales Police Headquarters. So that gives you a bit of a snapshot of where we are as a service. But I think you need to really focus on the fact that our operational performance indicators of the Vale are particularly good at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Christian. That looks very positive report. Call rates down. That's got to be good news. School visits and cadet programmes have started and recruitment going well. So all positive. Councillor Perks, would you like to ask your question, please?
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, there's always reports in the press for other fire services throughout the UK where fire services get attacked when they go to a call. I just wondered if there's any prevalence of that within the Vale or South Wales as a whole.
Okay, yeah, very good question. And yes, it's not just obviously fire service, but our colleagues in WAST and police as well. So yes, we do unfortunately have the effects of attacks on crews. Only recently we had one this weekend when I was on duty in Caerphilly. I'm pleased to say we haven't had this in the Vale of Glamorgan. We haven't received any, certainly for the last year or so, I believe. We haven't had any reports in the Vale, but certainly as a service around bonfire night seems to be the most prevalent. But now we're seeing it spill outside of those times as well. So yeah, we are very aware of it. Our police colleagues support us particularly well when those incidents happen, and we will, at every opportunity, take people to task and go through the criminal justice system. Because I think that's really important that our frontline workers are safe when they go to work and are safe when they return. What I can do, if this would help, I can certainly next time give you a full report or a presentation on the scale of this in South Wales. I can also show to you as well how we deal with it if that's something which you'd Chair you'd be up for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be.
Could I just ask another further point, Chair, as well, if that's okay,
Yeah.
on that? So if these attacks happen, how obviously it's going to interfere with the job that you've gone to do. Does it might not get to the point where it's a risk of life, not just for yourself, but for the other people you're trying to help as well? Because it's quite a dangerous situation. You've been called out on an emergency. And to be attacked yourselves, but the people you've gone to rescue, it puts them at risk as well, surely.
Yeah, it certainly can do. We haven't had any event where it stopped us from doing our duties. What we tend to find is we can be lured into a position where the attacks happen. So I can give you an example of a recent one where we've gone to a refuge fire, which is a bin fire in a skate park. We've dealt with the fire, and then on our return to the appliance, we've been attacked with stones. So certainly from our crew's perspective, we've got a responsibility for their safety. So they've been trained how to diffuse situations like that or move away from it. But when you talk about if we have to go to a house fire, we have to rescue people, we haven't experienced a situation where people have intervened to that element. Generally, it's a scene which has almost been set up for us, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So just generally the refuge fires, when I say around about November bonfire night, it's usually bonfires and stuff like that. So it's not
Okay.
necessarily when we're dealing with life-threatening rescues, but of course that scenario could, of course, happen.
Okay.
But to reassure you, we've got a lot of appliances in the service, so should one go off the run or be damaged, we have got plenty more that can intervene. So our service has always got those backups.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have I got any more questions? I can't see any yellow hands up and I can't see anybody on screen. So I think that just leaves me to say thank you ever so much for joining us tonight, Christian, and thank you for your report.
No problem. Thank you.
Good evening.
If I may, Chair, just to clarify,
Yeah.
we are as a committee agreeing for the presentation from Mr. Hadfield regarding that matter for the next meeting. Is that correct? Are you happy to carry that forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to carry that forward. Any objections from anybody? Can't see anything, so no, we look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, so I will make that a formal recommendation of the committee. So is Councillor Perks happy to second that?
Yes, I am, Amy.
Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 6, the County Borough of the Vale of Glamorgan electoral arrangements. I think, have we got Rob Thomas doing this presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob.
This is a report that went to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee on the 17th of November and was then referred on to Cabinet on the 22nd of November. There was a request to bring it here for information so that all members of this committee are cited on the changes that were introduced following a electoral review of each county borough council in Wales, and that was undertaken by the Local Democracy Boundary Commission. And those recommendations were reported to the Welsh Minister for Finance and Local Government for consideration, and they've been accepted. So this report is for noting because the changes that have been introduced are not up for debate. They've been put in place, and they were put in place on the 11th of October of last year. So what the report sets out is the relevant changes for the Vale of Glamorgan so that Scrutiny Committee, Cabinet and now this committee are cited on those. And the key part of the report which I would draw your attention to is paragraph 2.1 of the substantive report that is before you tonight, and that is on page 7 of that report. And what that paragraph does is to set out the changes that are relevant to the Vale of Glamorgan. So in brief, I'll just run these through for you. The ward of Barrack, the number of members which will be voted onto the council changes from 2 to 3 members. In Caddock ward, there will be 4 members instead of 3. Peterston Super Ely becomes a ward which has a slightly different geographical area to the ward which currently exists, but will remain as 1 member. Rhys ward will increase from 2 to 3 members. St Athan ward will increase from 1 to 2 members. St Bride's Major will increase from 1 to 2 members. St Nicholas and Llancarvan will become a new ward, which will have 1 member, and St Augustine's will increase from 2 to 3 members. Now that means that for the Vale of Glamorgan council area, there will be 54 members voted onto the council in May of this year, compared to 47 previously. There are a number of appendices attached to the report which are useful, and those appendices include the actual order itself at Appendix A, which starts on page 12 of the bundle on the reports. The appendix or the annex to that appendix is useful because it gives you a list of all the wards and the number of members per ward. And that is available bilingually, gives the bilingual names of the wards. And then you have a series of maps attached to the report as well, which illustrate the new ward boundaries where those wards have actually changed. Appendix C is useful because it sets out the wards and then the polling district's reference number. So that is it in summary, Chair. We have Vicky Davidson with us this evening, who is the Operational Manager for Legal Services, and we also have Rachel Starwood, who is the Electoral Services Manager. If anybody has any questions between the three of us, hopefully we'll be able to answer it. But as I say, this is for noting because these changes have been implemented, and the planning for the election or the elections, I should say, in May of this year are being based on these new arrangements.
Lovely. Thank you, Rob, for that. We have a question from Councillor Gerwyn Thomas, please.
Evening, Rob. How are you? Just one question, just an observation that part of the Boverton ward in Llanford Major, the UD0 ward, has no polling station. Now, I don't know how usual that is around the Vale, but I will ask, are there any plans in place to put a polling station, a temporary one, in place in the future?
We're actually planning for our polling stations for the elections as we speak, because the next report on the agenda tonight indicates the mini review of polling stations that we've carried out since the last election. It isn't unusual because that can happen. The way we plan for polling stations is obviously we learn from previous elections, and we look to make the polling stations as accessible as possible. The mini polling station review that we've carried out, which will come on to the next agenda, has basically been carried out having had feedback from communities, from local members, but also having learned from some of the challenges last year as well around COVID and people queuing, and considering those polling stations where there was a long wait, for example, for people to vote because of the size of stations or because of the need for more marshalling, for example. So all those factors have been fed into the review, but it isn't unusual. But I don't know if any of my colleagues, Victoria or Rachel, can shed any more light on that particular instance.
Yeah, I can come in on that, Rob. Thanks, Chair. There have been changes as a consequence, as Rob has highlighted, changes made as a result of the review, and a number of the polling districts will obviously be within different electoral wards, and a number of polling district reference numbers have been changed. I've just looked quickly as I was listening to your question, Councillor. UD0 I currently have recorded as Llanford Major, and it will be picked up, as Rob has indicated, under the next agenda item. Forgive me if I have, Councillor Thomas, misunderstood the area of the Vale of Glamorgan that you're referring to, but that's how it's been referred to on my list.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's a part of the Boverton ward of Llanford Major.
So probably better, and a matter for Rob as the electoral registration officer, but probably better if we deal with that under the next agenda item.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, do I have any other questions? I did have one point, Rob. Maybe it's a matter of clarification, really. On the schedule, Article 2, page 7, and I think most places, we've got St Bride's Major, and it's the communities of Ewenny, St Bride's Major, St Donat's and Wick, but it doesn't include, it should read Marcross, Monknash and Ogmore by Sea. But that we're not getting those three communities printed in anything. I don't know why.
Again, I'm happy to come back in on that. And if the response I'm going to give you, Chair, doesn't answer your query, but I can come back on this subsequently after tonight's meeting. But actually, the position is, as a result of the review, and as Rob indicated, that was implemented by law on the 11th of October last year. The ward that you're referring to is, which is St Bride's Major, is to be known as the community of St Bride's Major, Ogmore by Sea and Wick and Ewenny and St Donat's. That's the change that has been made in accordance with the schedule that's attached to that order, which I think you'll find amongst the bundle that's forms part of the agenda. I don't know if that clarifies it, but
I think on the map, if you turn over to the maps, there are clearly 7 defined areas on the map. And it just seems a shame that Monknash and Marcross, the 7 of them, maybe it's too much to put, I don't know. But I just wanted to clarify, really, that that was sorted. Yeah. OK, thank you. There being no other questions, then.
Yeah, I can just come in on that as well. I think what's important to note, those maps show those wards. You're right to point out that the name of the ward isn't possibly as full as it could be.
Yes.
I think that's the point you're making, Chair. And that's a fair comment. But I'm, what I would say is, in carrying out this review, as well as the geographical spread of the ward, it's the names that are also set in stone, if you like. So that's a given. And I suspect the same as Victoria's pointed out, it's just that the name would have been too long. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. OK. Thank you very much. OK, lovely. So if we move on then to agenda item 7, polling places and polling stations, the mini review. Are you doing this presentation, Rob, as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can certainly start off on this, and exactly the same format. This was a report that was taken to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 17th of November, Cabinet on the 22nd of November, and resolved to bring it here. And if you look at the substantive report again, the changes to the advocated through the review were approved. And the review focused, as I said earlier, actually on feedback following the Senedd election and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections back in May of last year, and has had regard to the COVID measures that were put in place at the time. The challenges then that that resulted from the need for those measures, and also perhaps with a bit of a crystal ball, thinking about what measures we might need in place for May of this year, and that is where the difficulty arises. In terms of the process, there were visits undertaken to each of the existing polling stations, as well as the proposed stations identified as those requiring attention. There was consultation, and there has been consultation with local ward members. And as I say, the main section of the report highlights those areas where there has been changes, and those start off on page 7 of the main cabinet report and take you through it ward by ward. So there have been some slight changes to the in the Barry waterfront area for Barrack and Buttrill's electoral wards. There have been some minor changes again in Buttrill's and Ithdid electoral wards involving the Margaret Alexander Community Centre. You can see reference in paragraph 2.7 to the Caddock electoral ward and the role of the Glenbrook Inn. Cowbridge, again, reference to the town hall there and the fact that there will be 3 polling stations in the town hall itself, Station A, Station B and Station C. And then some minor changes as well in Gibbons Down and Court. And also in Llantwit Major, where you will note that the role of the leisure centre will be increased, and we're also moving into the main hall in the leisure centre, and that was because of the specific issues around queuing and waiting times in Llantwit as well, and given the number of electors waiting to cast their vote. And finally, some minor changes in terms of the use of the Wenvo Community Centre, and also Sully Library, where there was issues around safe access and egress from the library, and a one-way system will be put in place there, again following discussion with the local members. I would add another couple of points for the benefit of the Community Liaison Committee that have emerged since the review was undertaken. The first one relates to Iweni and the use of the village hall in Iweni previously. Now, members from Iweni may be aware that the village hall there is not a planned reopening of that anytime soon. So the village hall has traditionally been used for elections. We have managed to secure an alternative at the Vale Cricket Club, which is approximately 0.7 miles down the road towards Corntown. That has been secured and booked, and I know Councillor Cave, who is on the call, has been advised of this and has been advised of the change. And the second area that's worth mentioning is Thundao. The village hall is going to be used in Thundao rather than the Holy Trinity Church. Again, members of this committee may recall that last year the Trinity Church was used as the village hall was being refurbished and was unavailable. That refurbishment has completed. So we will, as of May this year, revert back to using the village hall. The benefit of the village hall is it has toilets and facilities available within it. And it's almost a return to what we have done previously in Thundao. So what I would ask, Chair, is that in considering this report or noting this report this evening for information, if those two additional changes could be noted by committee, and then we can ensure that that gets fed back to Cabinet at the next Cabinet meeting for completeness, so that the changes at Iweni and the changes at Thundao are also minuted. So that concludes the run through. But as I said, same as previously, we've got Vicky and Rachel on the meeting tonight, and between the three of us, hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that arise.
Muting and unmuting is constant, isn't it? Thank you, Rob. Councillor Cave, would you like to ask your question, please?
It's not really a question, it's just for completeness. I'd just like to point out that obviously Iweni sadly will no longer be part of the Landau ward. The Landau Iweni ward and the name Iweni has been part of our electoral process for a long time now. And it's very sad to think that Landau Iweni won't exist anymore. So the new changes down where people will vote with the cricket club will no longer affect myself as the Landau Iweni ward member, because sadly Iweni won't be in the ward anymore.
Okay,
thank you, Councillor.
Chair, through yourself, that's useful. So thank you to Councillor Cave for acknowledging that. Really, for completeness is useful.
Lovely, thank you. Any other questions, please? Can't see any other hands up. Amy, have you got the recommendations for Landau and Iweni?
I have, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, so that item is finished and we can move on to agenda item 8, which is the Vale of Glamorgan Public Service Board, the draft wellbeing assessment. And I don't know, I see Tom. Yeah, Tom, are you delivering this one?
Yes, good evening, Chair. And I'm joined this evening by my colleague Lloyd Fisher. Lloyd is a Senior Policy and Data Officer in our Strategy and Partnerships team and is largely responsible for having put the wellbeing assessment together. So I thought it would be really useful, and I'm grateful to Lloyd for joining us this evening as well. With your permission, Chair, Lloyd and I have got some slides that we can walk members through because we thought that might be an easier way of taking the item if you're happy with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Great stuff. Over to you to project those, Lloyd. So thank you for having us this evening. What we wanted to cover off was a bit of an overview and introduction to what the PSB is. And equally to introduce what the draft wellbeing assessment needs to contain, why we do it, and what we've done. Lloyd is going to walk us through as well some of the key findings that have come out of the wellbeing assessment. And because this is now out for public consultation, there's an opportunity for your committee chair to provide any comments that you may wish to feed into that consultation process, either this evening or for anybody who's on the call this evening to do so via the survey, which can be found on the website. So just by way of very quick background in terms of who the PSB is and what the role is, committee will be aware that Councillor Mike Cudley from Penarth is a representative of Town and Community Councils on the Public Services Board for the Vale of Glamorgan, and the PSB brings together a range of statutory partners and invited participants. It's a statutory body that's been established under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and it's intended to bring together those organisations in order that we can identify how collective action and additional actions can be undertaken in order to improve the well-being of our residents right the way across the Vale. And the primary means, Chair, that the PSB go about doing this is by producing a wellbeing plan for each 5-year term, and the next plan will be published in April of 2023, and underpinning that plan is the wellbeing assessment, and this is what we're consulting on currently up until the middle of February, and that assessment needs to consider the state of economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of an area. So it's an incredibly broad area of work. And the next slide will show us what we need to consider as part of the assessment itself. And it breaks the Vale of Glamorgan down into 3 areas. So it looks at areas in the west and Barry, and then in the east covering communities such as Penarth and Dinas Powys, as well as collectively across the area. It needs to consider the state of well-being in each of those community areas, as well as the overall Vale of Glamorgan area, and we need to look at further analysis that the board is carrying out for assessing well-being of the area. So we look at things like what is likely to happen in the future, which the assessment refers to as futures focused work. We also look at a huge range of different indicators and other evidence and information. So this is a really detailed piece of work. I'll hand over to Lloyd in a second just to run us through the approach, and he'll also describe some of the key findings. But just to give you a flavour of the timetable that we're working to, we were drafting and we've engaged on the assessment and the contents of the assessment prior to Christmas, and we brought together all of the partners at the PSB in November to take a look at the findings, and the PSB signed that off at the December meeting. So we're now currently consulting on it until the middle of February, as I said. We'll revise this over February and March so that it's in place for the 1st of April, and we'll publish it then. And then there's a very swift piece of work to start in terms of how we go about responding to what the findings are. It may be useful, Chair, for members when Lloyd is walking you through the assessment and our key findings, to also be thinking about how each of your organisations may use or be able to use the information that is contained within the assessment. We're very keen that this isn't just a geeky piece of work that we do once every 5 years. So just to bear that in mind. I can see Councillor Robertson has indicated, so I don't know if you want me to pause at that point, Chair.
Councillor Robertson, do you want to ask your question now or at the end, which would suit you best?
Just very quickly, Chair, thank you for letting me in, and thank you for that, Tom. The consultation, how's that going to be organised? Because I was a little bit dismayed by the consultation on active travel, which seemed to actually get singularly few responses. I mean, it's very important that there's an engagement with the local community. So how actually are we going to carry out that consultation? Thank you, Chair.
Of course, no problem at all. Thank you, Councillor Robertson, for the question. The PSB and all partners of the PSB are responsible for undertaking and delivering the consultation on this. So it's a case that all of our organisations will be promoting access to the consultation. Because of where we currently are in terms of the public health situation, it is predominantly online, and we're promoting the survey that accompanies this consultation through the social media challenges of the local authority as well as the PSB, and we've provided a pack of information to our partners as well. All town and community councils have also been invited to participate in a stakeholder workshop next week. That will be delivered online. We ran some online sessions when we were delivering the council's challenge plan for decarbonisation, and actually we had really good participation through that means. And Lloyd will also describe in a second some of the findings from the consultation that we undertook, or the engagement work rather, that we undertook last year to inform the wellbeing assessment itself, and I was pleased with the response rate for that particular piece of work. But hopefully that answers the question in the round, and Lloyd will be able to supplement it shortly.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thank you. So I'll hand over to you at that point, Lloyd.
Thanks, Tom. As Tom mentioned, it's a quite comprehensive piece of work, the wellbeing assessment. So it's made up of a number of components. The view of the Vulcan report acts as both an introduction to the assessment and sets out some of the conclusions from the analysis that are set out in these detailed themed reports. There's 4 detailed themed reports, one on demographics, one on education and the economy, one on health and communities, and one on environment and transport. The findings of which I'll go through in a moment. And to inform the analysis, a number of key factors have to be considered. So as Tom mentioned, we have to look at analysis through the frame of 3 community areas. We've included a Let's Talk engagement feedback, which I'll go through in a moment. We have to look at both the assets and the strengths, as well as the needs of the local area. We have to look at the future trends, and also consider the National Wellbeing Goals for Wales, the National Indicators for Wales, 5 ways of working as set out in the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, social economic factors, and also the particular issue of COVID-19. Also set out in statutory guidance for the wellbeing assessment. The assessment has to consider other assessments, such as the population needs assessment that's undertaken concurrently by the Regional Partnership Board, and also the childcare sufficiency assessment for the Vale of Morgan. So just move on now to the next slide, which looks at the findings of the Let's Talk engagement. So to inform the wellbeing assessment, we've undertaken engagement through the Let's Talk survey, but also through social media. The survey was run between July and September 2021, and the findings have been further supplemented by existing engagement that's been undertaken both by PSB partners and by through council engagement, such as that undertaken to inform Project Zero. The findings of the assessment have been intertwined with our quantitative analysis to provide a qualitative insight into people's wellbeing in the Vale. So you see through those detailed reports, both data and evidence, but also data and evidence that's come through this survey. So as Tom mentioned, a really good response to this survey. So we had 1,264 responses. 45% were aged 55 to 74, 90% of respondents were white, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish or British, and 71 were owner occupiers. So these are some of the key findings that came through the survey. So, sorry, just minimize that. We had 83% either fairly or very satisfied with the Vale of Glamorgan as a place to live. 32% reported being lonely sometimes. 42% thought there had been an increase in crime and antisocial behaviour in the last 12 months. 86% that they were fairly or very concerned about climate change, and 70% that climate change was already having an impact in their areas. 22% reported a worsening of their financial circumstances in the last 12 months, and 17% responded having struggled to afford household bills in the last 12 months. Of the respondents who answered a question on the affordability of food, 54% answered that they'd had smaller meals or skipped meals as a result in the last 12 months. So this slide sets out some of the overview findings of the assessment that are summarised in the View of the Vale document, View of the Vale Morgan report, sorry, and sets out some of the key themes that run through those detailed reports. So for many, we know that well-being in the Vale of Glamorgan is good. Against a number of key indicators, we have good education outcomes, earnings that are above the Welsh national average, people live in good health and are satisfied with where they live and have good access to high quality green and blue spaces. However, we know that this experience is not consistent for all across the Vale of Glamorgan, and that for some their well-being continues to be affected by experiences of financial hardship, poorer health, high rates of crime and unequal exposure to environmental risk. So while we know that the pandemic has had an impact on all lives across the Vale of Glamorgan and continues to have an impact, we know that this impact has been disproportionately felt by certain people, groups and communities in the Vale. It's placed increasing pressure on those who may have had good economic, social, cultural, mental and physical well-being prior to the pandemic. But for those who are already struggling under the burden of poor well-being, the pandemic has particularly weighed heavy. We know that it's most likely that a climate and nature emergency will have the largest impact in the Vale. I need to just move my thing. There we go. It's likely to shape key aspects of future well-being, not only our interaction with the natural environment, but the way that the economy in the Vale of Glamorgan develops and how we think about delivering health and social care in the future. We know that people living in our more rural communities often experience greater difficulties in accessing services and transport, and as a result can feel more isolated. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So before we run through the key themed reports and some of the key findings, this slide sets out some key insights which are good to keep in mind as we run through those slides. So the population of the Vale of Glamorgan continues to grow. In mid-2020, the population was estimated to be 135,295, a 5.4% growth in the last 5 years. There's been significant growth in the population aged 65 and over, a growth of 9.8% in the last 5 years. And 2018 national population projections forecast that the Vale of Glamorgan will experience the second largest percentage population growth of all local authority areas in the next decade. Notable growth is projected for the population aged 65 to 84 and 85 and over. So we have three lower super output areas, or LSOAs, that are measured in the 10% most deprived areas in Wales against, as recorded through the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. These are Gibbonsdown 2, Court 3 and Buttrells 2. A further 7 LSOAs are measured in the 10 to 20% most deprived areas in Wales, and all these areas are located in the east of Barry. All but one of these areas have a proportion of population aged 0 to 15 above 20%, which is the largest share of all LSOAs in the Vale of Glamorgan. And 5 LSOAs are measured in the top 10% most deprived LSOAs in Wales against the income domain, and 4 against the employment domain. And 2 are included in the top 10% most deprived against both of the domains. These domains are important because they have the highest weighting of all domains in the WIMD analysis. So although the pandemic has had an impact on people across the Vale, indicators suggest that the impact has been felt most by younger people, older people, and those in our most deprived areas. So I'll just run through the key findings of the themed reports now. So this is the Education and Economy report. So we know that the number of pupils eligible for free school meals has grown from 2,478 in 2018-19 to 3,435 in 2020-2021. Those LSOAs in Barry are more deprived against the WIMD education domain than LSOAs in the Eastern and Western Vale. Barry has the highest proportion of people aged 16 to 64 with no qualifications than areas in the Eastern and Western Vale. The majority of apprenticeships undertaken in the Vale of Glamorgan are in the health, care and public services sector. We have employment that is consistently above that of the Welsh employment rate, but currently, or at the time of the writing, remained below pre-pandemic levels. The percentage of unemployed remains under that of the Welsh and GB average. The top 4 employment industries in the Vale of Glamorgan are human health and social work, wholesale and retail trade, education and the accommodation and food services activities sector. And the biggest forecasting growth in jobs will be in the information and communication industry, professional, scientific and technical activities sector, and the agricultural, forestry and fishing sector. So 4 LSOAs ranked in the top 10% most deprived, as I've mentioned, and 7 in the 10 to 20 most deprived against the wind employment domain. These are all located in Barry, and 5 LSOAs are ranked in the top 10% against the wind income domain, again, all located in Barry. Claimant counts, that's the indicator of people claiming unemployment support, has grown continuously over the pandemic, and there have been increases across all age groups and across all areas. However, we've seen the highest proportion of recipients can be observed in those LSOAs identified as most deprived through the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. The median house price paid has risen consistently and is higher than the Welsh average in the Vale of Glamorgan, but has grown substantially in the last year also. The estimated monthly average cost of rented accommodation has also grown over the last 7 years. 2 LSOAs record a 40% likelihood of poor quality housing. These are Buttrell's 1 in Barry and St Augustine's 2 in the Eastern Vale. And data from across Wales on homelessness and the pandemic has shown a monthly increase between August 2020 and May 2021 in the number of homeless individuals in temporary accommodation. So I'll move now on to the Health and Communities report. Against key health indicators, children appear to be laying the foundations for good health and well-being throughout their life in the Vale. However, we can see against a number of key indicators there's higher rates of harmful nitrogen dioxide pollutant in more deprived areas and concerns about the impact of COVID on children and young people, particularly against their mental health. There's high average life expectancy, although those from more deprived areas are expected to live less years. Drinking above guidelines is a concern, particularly in the Western Vale. There's been a drop in the number of people eating 5 fruit and vegetables a day, although this has been consistent over a number of years. Those in most deprived areas are less likely to engage in healthy behaviours and are most likely to experience poor health outcomes as a result. Between July 2020 and 2021, there was 4,644 people fed by the Vale Food Bank. People were against indicators collected through the National Survey for Wales. People were satisfied with where they live, and that was above the Welsh average, and they were more likely to volunteer and engage in arts and culture than other areas across Wales. The Vale records lower numbers of total crime when compared to other areas. However, we've seen a rise in antisocial behaviour, and domestic abuse is particularly a concern in these numbers. We've seen high return travel times as measured through an indicator in the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation to key services from our more rural areas and poorer internet in more rural areas of the Western Vale. And older people experience better health outcomes than the Welsh national average when compared to other areas, although there's heightened risk of older people in the Western Vale experiencing loneliness and isolation. And older people have also been identified as one of the groups at high risk of experiencing poor mental health as a result of the pandemic. We also know that the number of people living with dementia is expected to increase in the next few years, and that those experiencing poor outcomes as a result of dementia is also expected to increase. So I'll just move on to the environment and transport section. So the volume of road traffic has consistently been growing in the Vale of Glamorgan and peaked in 2019. And detailed commuting patterns show that the majority of commuters live and work in the Vale of Glamorgan. Vale journeys have been growing year on year, but in contrast, bus and coach journeys have been falling across Wales, and the pandemic has placed an increased pressure of many of these services. Access to public transport is a particular issue in more rural areas of the Vale of Glamorgan. Carbon emissions from transport outgrew domestic emissions in 2014 as the second highest emitter of CO2 in the Vale of Glamorgan. data from the Department of Transport shows that in the Vale of Glamorgan currently there's fewer opportunities for publicly available electrical charging devices for charging electric vehicles when compared to other local authorities in Wales. Active travel by walking or bicycle is higher than in other areas of Wales. We've seen consistently that per capita CO2 emissions have been higher than the Welsh average in the Vale of Glamorgan since 2005. While most areas have good proximity to accessible green space, access is measured as poorer in more rural areas of the Vale of Glamorgan, and the results from the Let's Talk survey highlight that there are clear concerns for the future of green spaces in the Vale, with the respondents answering that they expected against a number of environmental factors that this would worsen over the next 5 years. Climate change is likely to result in significantly increased risks of wildfires, coastal erosion and tidal and fluvial flooding in the Vale, while Palmerston community area is included in the top 50 areas most at risk from flooding in Wales, as measured by the Natural Resources Wales. This aligns the data taken from the Welsh Index of Multiple Declaration with Caddock 5 Alice Way, which is located in the Palmerston community area, having the highest risk flood score. And this links to another piece of research where it shows that those from more deprived areas have a higher flood disadvantage risk. That's their ability to recover from flooding incidents than other areas. Just hand back to Tom now.
Thank you, Lloyd. I don't know whether you want me to pause at that point because I think Councillor Ian Perry is indicated and Councillor Robertson, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Perry, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, well, I possibly want to invite Lloyd Fisher to the Planning Committee meeting because the Vale of Glamorgan seem to be insisting on building on the village green in Bombleston, and I'm just hearing that there's a shortage of open space in the rural Vale. Well, of course there is when the Vale of Glamorgan insist on building on every little scrap of open space that there is in the rural Vale. So things are not joined up here when you're telling us there's a shortage of public open space, and yet you are the council, the organisation that's trying to remove the public open space. So can you actually get things joined up?
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Do you want to come back in there, Tom or Lloyd?
Yeah, but by all means, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Perry. And planning matters are not something that I'm an expert and specialist in, so I'm not in a position to provide you with an informed response this evening. I suppose what I would point out is that the evidence base that we're presenting this evening is one that has been developed for the Public Services Board. Absolutely, it's an important part of the way that the council then also considers this information when taking decisions. But as I say, I'm not an expert in those planning matters, so I'm not going to be able to properly comment. But I think the Chief Executive, who is far more informed on planning than I am, may well be able to add to that.
Yeah, that would be useful because we seem to be sort of going around in circles and it's all in limbo at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty with our public open space, and it does seem to residents that the Vale of Glamorgan Council is determined to use any action it can to build on our village green, and isn't going to take no from an answer, not even from the Planning Committee, and it will try everything in its power, legal or unlawful, to build on that. And here we are hearing tonight that there's a shortage of public open space, which is what we've been saying for the past several years when this has been raised. And I'm aware there's issues in Penarth, there are issues in Cowbridge, there are issues all around the Vale where people are fighting and spending a lot of time trying to protect our public open space, and we're trying to protect it from the Vale of Glamorgan Council, who are now telling us there's a shortage, which we've been saying for the last 3 years. So it's not very good use of our time, is it? I do have great sympathy with you, but there needs to be a much more joined up plan. But hopefully, yeah, Rob Thomas can tell us some more.
Thank you, Councillor. Rob, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a general comment, first of all, that obviously any matters relating to any specific site where there is a planning process to be followed will be determined by the Planning Committee. So it would be for that committee to determine the appropriateness or otherwise of any particular scheme for development. But what I would say, and I think this is relevant, is there is a balance to be struck in terms of any particular policy direction taken by the council or any community or town council for that matter. There is always a balance to be struck between the need to protect open space, the need to look at climate emergency issues, to the need to look at how we protect our natural environment, and also alongside that, how do we plan for the future in terms of the demands and the needs placed upon us as an organisation for new development, for new housing for our residents. We have a homelessness crisis in the Vale. So the point I think that needs to be borne in mind is that any proposals and any policy direction in terms of protecting land, protecting open space, mitigating things like impacts on congestion has to be balanced against the needs of our population for new housing, so that we can manage the growth in population in the Vale. So there are two sides to the debate, and the council is in a position where it needs to balance that debate and to come forward with a strategy moving forward. That's why we're currently looking at the local development plan and looking at the review of that plan to see how we move forward in the future. So that's the point I wanted to make, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much, Rob. Could I just go back to Tom? Tom, I think, would it be better to get to the end of the presentation and then take all questions afterwards? Would everybody be happy with that, that we just get to the end of this presentation and then be open for all our questions?
Yes, I think that's a much better idea. Thank you.
Yes,
lovely. Chair. Thank you. Carry on, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So just to sum up, the wellbeing assessment is really important for us as a local authority as part of the evidence base that Rob was just describing. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to Town and Community Council colleagues who've provided input into the consultation on the Council's forthcoming annual delivery plan, which will be published from April of this year. And you'll see within that plan a series of 6 themes that are listed here around Project Zero, tackling hardship, looking at how we work with communities to build capacity at a very local level, how we balance and provide links across the environmental, employment and access to services issues in terms of infrastructure. Some of the work that the organisation wants to do to transform the way that we operate, and that is really important in this context because we recognise that working in partnership and doing things differently is really important. And finally, the issues around care and support, which underpin all aspects of well-being. So the work that Lloyd has described this evening has very much been used to underpin and inform that particular piece of work. So just finally, we were hoping this evening that members would be able to share their thoughts, as I say, either this evening or then subsequently via the survey. And the questions that we're asking, Chair, as part of the consultation is, do you think that the wellbeing assessment contains all the relevant information, and do we cover the right issues? So thinking back to those 4 elements of wellbeing, do you agree with us in terms of the key issues that as a Public Services Board we've identified within the assessment? And does this feel like the Vale of Glamorgan that you experience? And then finally, to help us begin shaping the draft wellbeing plan ahead of 2023, have you got any areas that as a committee you feel that the PSB should be particularly focusing in on for the future? So thank you very much indeed, Chair. That's the end of the presentation from Lloyd and I.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Lloyd, as well. And if we go to questions now, then I've got Councillor Robertson. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, first of all, I wasn't going to do this, but I'll answer Tom's last question. I think, yeah, in general terms, I think you're asking the right questions. You know my views on man-made global warming. Global warming itself is a different issue altogether. But actually, I'd like also to say that I agree with Councillor Perry about the slight contradiction between what the council says and what the council does. That, you know, we've had an awful lot of development in Dennis Paris as well. But my main concern on that point would be that we keep building more and more houses, and we're building these houses on a creaking Victorian infrastructure. And I'd like to see rather more effort made in improving our infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, whether it be public transport or I know our Welsh government in its wisdom has decided not to build any more roads, but that is a problem. But actually, it's two little points that I wanted to raise. I was interested to see where you expected the growth in jobs to be. One of them was farming. I find this interesting at a time when central governments of all hues, Westminster, Scotland and Wales, are all trying to, actually, it seems to me, discourage farmers from farming and close down farms. So I don't understand how you're expecting to have growth in jobs in that industry. And secondly, fishing. I was absolutely fascinated by that. I didn't realise the Vale of Glamorgan had a fishing industry. Where's our fleet? Anyway, thank you for that, Tom, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Moving on to Councillor Barnaby, please.
Oh, hello. Yes, thank you. I've also joined up before Councillor Perry spoke. Many times we've had the planning team or the highways team, and every time I say, what about the well-being agreement? And I get blank response. I think what you've done, and thank you for your presentation and to Lloyd, the presentation is fabulous. Everything in it is fabulous, but we just not got the joined up approach with the other departments in the Vale of Glamorgan Council. I just concur with everything the other two people have said. The green space we keep losing. We've got loads of brown space, but we keep building on farmland. Then you say you want to encourage farming. Okay, I think when we were in the LDP, I raised the fact that we had 150 years supply of employment land, and that was brownfield land, and yet still we're building houses on greenfield, good farming land. And I just don't think there's any joined up approach. You know, I represent St Athan, and we've just had a planning, it was building going on now on an area that the children used to play on. And I was told, oh, well, the golf course is green space, but it's you've got to be a member of the golf course. You can't kick a football on a golf course. There's just no joined up approach with planning over the environment for the public and the residents. And that's why you get so many disgruntled residents. We are losing green space. We are getting congestion because the houses are in the wrong place. I know they get in the Vale 106 money is a high return, and also for the Welsh government the taxes are a good return. I remember sitting in a presentation here when somebody said Rhondda Cynon-Taf could only dream of the money that the Vale was getting for a housing development, but that shouldn't be the reason to do the housing developments. You know, it's I do agree with what you've proposed. I do agree with Tom and Lloyd, but what I don't agree with is with the whole Vale strategy in ignoring it. What's the point in having this document if nobody's going to take any notice in the other departments?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnaby. Councillor Mark Wilson, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I think there's been interesting discussions made by community councillors and Vale councillors over the subject so far. But I think what you've got also bearing in mind is context as well. Now, at the moment, there's almost 6,000 people waiting on the housing list in the Vale Glamorgan. As a member in Penarth, my biggest caseload is people who want to be housed. That is number one issue in Penarth, as how I see it. House prices in Penarth are extortionate. You know, it's almost £500,000 for a 3-bedroom terraced house now in Penarth, and we have great pressures, you know, and it's not surprising. You know, you say you want to preserve the green space. I totally understand that the Vale Glamorgan is a beautiful place and lots of people want to live here, hence the high prices. But also lots of people also want to be rehoused or don't have adequate housing. And it is a balance, as you know, as rightly said, the chief executive said, you know, that it's about a balance, and getting that balance right is not easy. So I do have some sympathy of people who represent villages and in the Vale Glamorgan. They're beautiful places, and I understand that, but I also understand the needs of lots of people as well. And we've got to house people. We also got to make sure we got schools for those people as well. That's on land, you know, and it is a difficult balance. You're quite right. But it's something that we got to address, and the LGP process is part of that. That I'd urge all of you and other people to submit your responses to the LGP process, because that is important, because that shapes the future land use within the Vale Glamorgan, and that acts as the framework for planning in the future in the Vale Glamorgan as well. And the other thing that I need to correct people on is actually, it's not the council that builds the houses. In fact, the council builds very little houses at all, actually. It's developers that build the houses in the Vale Glamorgan. If you look at the number of houses the actual Vale Glamorgan builds, you know, it's not even 100, to be quite honest. You know, if you really want to look at who builds the houses, it's the developers, okay? And that's what you've got to remember, you know? And as a planning committee member myself, I've got to look at all the facts in front of me as well as policy before I make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I bring in Councillor Christopher Tatt? I can see your hand up, so shall I have you next, please? I think you're muted, so if you can unmute yourself, lovely.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to put my question or my comment. I think there's a serious deficit in the presentation we've just seen in one area of well-being, and it's very basic. It's the availability of doctors' surgeries for communities. I mean, in the last, 2 years, we've had 2 doctors' surgeries close in Penarth. Where I live here in Surrey, 50% of the Surrey population cannot get registered at the Surrey doctor's surgery because it's not big enough and they don't have any room to expand. So sort of building on the points that have already been made, where we got the housing increase, quite significant housing increase, where we actually got a decline in a fundamental factor of well-being, and that's doctor's surgery. So I endorse all the comments about this. There seems to be a lack of joined up thinking. And I'd also like to add that I agree with the previous speaker's comments on infrastructure. We still have the Victorian infrastructure in the Vale. Okay, they're not completely in charge of what's happening, but surely we can't carry on building houses in the way that we are and not doing something about infrastructure.
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor. Tom, do you want to come back on any of these points, or shall I carry on taking questions, and you can make your notes as you see fit?
If I can do that, Chair, that'd be great. And I know Lloyd is taking some notes for some of the data-based questions as well.
Lovely, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Mike Cuddy, please?
Yes, yeah. If I can make about 3 points, please. 2 refer to discussion up till now. There are other opportunities to not to sort of overload the wellbeing plan, with comments. One is the fact that the LDV process is starting with a delivery agreement, and you've had the opportunity to comment on that, and that will give you, if the agreement is amended, I think, certainly in terms of what Penarth has said, is that there is room for early action in getting in on the process. If you miss that opportunity, you'll be back to the same old, same old. You'll have forgotten what the development plan has said, and only when someone comes along to build houses will the community rise up. Well, it would be useful to avoid that, and the delivery agreement, which has been consulted upon, and I hope those officers responsible will take note of this. If early action and early involvement works in any way whatsoever, some of the downstream issues may not be as dramatic and hurtful as they are. The second issue is the fact that the Public Service Board, and I'm as been said by somebody earlier on, is trying to include the town and community councils. We've had a couple of meetings so far, not that well attended. First was a general one, asking communities to put forward issues and things they were doing generally. Secondly, we've had a very successful meeting with the police, basically on community safety, and I don't think any collaborative arrangements were arrived at, but certainly it was a reasonable discussion with a partner. This is an attempt, poor, limited though it might be, to link into other of our strategic bodies in the Vale, and hopefully something can come of that in terms of the organisation of community safety issues. We hope to move on, though, to other issues, and that goes back to Tom's. Now I remember it's Tom who raised the issue. The opportunity here is for us to have here collective and new actions, and this follows that theme. And one area where there is both opportunity and money and evidence is on community, climate change and issues and biodiversity related to it. Those who attended the area meeting of which included the Vale last night will have heard a representative of One Boys Vales, in fact, who is the administrator for some of the money, some of the Places for Nature money and other money, which is available, and a lot of communities are already making use of that. My ambition was that there would be some sort of collective effort on the part of community councils which really addresses biodiversity, and there is substantial money available if we can get the evidence base. And I think officers in the Vale are actually collaborating in this, in terms of looking for green networks and things like that, if we can do something like that in the future. And there are also, I think we discussed, and I know there's work coming out on this, age-friendly Vale. And again, there's a room there for collaborative action. There was a very strong presentation on Land Dock in the meeting we had with the Public Service Board attendees there. So there are opportunities in the future to work collaboratively, introduce collaborative actions and new actions, and commend the Vale in actually trying to make real the fact that communities are part of the Public Service Board. I think the final thing is that, and perhaps Tom can deal with this, is our relationship with the Regional Partnership Board, because a lot of issues have been talked tonight are really dealing with them, which includes obviously the Health Board, but particularly, and how resources are doled out in relation to our areas, which is community health, things like that, and their hospital related issues. So they're the three things I would say in support of this evening's effort. And obviously the opportunity in future to work, to shape the well-being plan. A lot of the things we have in the statistics, the causal relationships really can't be dealt with by the Vale, and hopefully we can sort of boil them down to things which you can affect in the future, and in that community and town councils can be effective. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Cuddy. Thank you. I see Councillor Perry. Do you want to come back in again?
Yeah, if I may, yeah. I'm yet to see any evidence that building more and more houses actually makes housing more affordable. There's no real correlation. You build 20,000 new houses in the Vale of Glamorgan, you don't necessarily bring house prices down. And I think that myth needs to be challenged at the council level, because if the planning committee is going to push through more houses on the basis of making housing affordable, we're going to have 120,000 or 500,000 new houses in the Vale of Glamorgan, still have an affordability problem. There does seem to be a lack of knowledge within the Vale of Glamorgan Council as to what's actually happening within the Vale of Glamorgan Council, as well as a lack of joined up thinking. There's a lot of schemes around Wales in regards to empty homes, with double council tax being charged in places like Swansea. Because we have a lot of empty homes here in the Vale of Glamorgan, and perhaps we ought to actually take on one of those landowners who's actually got a number of empty properties tonight, because there are 4 properties in an area where apparently there's a huge shortage of housing, which is why we need to build on Village Greens in Bombleston. In our area, there are 4 empty dwellings owned by the Vale of Glamorgan Council, and apparently they've been empty for 2 years. And yet we hear Mark Wilson here championing more house building, when the Vale of Glamorgan Council really should be spending its 25 million or so, which it's got in the bank account for affordable housing, on actually bringing its own housing stock back into use. It's absolutely appalling. And again, not joined up. The Vale of Glamorgan Council has got so many empty properties, not just short-term empty, but 2 years. That's not short-term. That's completely unacceptable. If it was a private landlord, we'd be all jumping up and down, but this is the Vale of Glamorgan Council. And I think that this thing needs to be in public, and there should be questions asked, because we hear about all the homelessness, lack of affordability, shortage of homes. Well, there's 4 homes that could be brought back into use pretty quickly, without building on green fields, without building on parks and green spaces. It's just simple things that can be done to improve the situation. It's 4. There may be more, but you've got to start somewhere and start with the basics, and that is filling empty homes, filling empty buildings, and not just building new for the sake of the environment and everything else. I'll leave there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perry. Where were those 4 empty homes? Are they in your ward?
They are apparently in St George's.
In St George's. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll take it upon myself to chase that up and have a look at it for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think Mike Cuddy's yellow hand is historic, and I think does Councillor Robertson, do you want to come back in, or is that a historic hand?
Thank you, Chair. No, I do want to come back in. There's a couple of things. I don't know if Rob Thomas is still about, but he might be able to help me out with this. But Mike Cuddy, I think, said that you should get in when they do the new LDP. Well, it's my understanding, I could have this completely wrong, but it's my understanding that there actually isn't going to be a new LDP as such. We're having a rolling LDP where the current LDP is just added to, so you're going to have to be quick off the mark to make sure you get in there when the changes that happen to that. Also, I'd like to point out that quite a lot of decision making on planning is going to be taken away from the Vale of Glamorgan. So quite big projects are going to go to what is grandiosely named the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee. And this is basically, you'll have the effective, this is coming down from Welsh Government, it's being pushed on us rather, just in the same way as the 12,000 houses were at the last LDP. But basically what this means is that 10 local authorities, including the Vale of Glamorgan, will be contributing and financially contributing to a new sort of quango called the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee, which will be making big decisions about what happens in the Vale of Glamorgan. I regard this as an attack on democracy insofar as this is like, as I said, a quango effectively. So maybe Rob can tell us about that. And as I say, I mean, we have a major problem with interference from the Welsh Government actually telling us as a council, as a local authority, what we have to do in terms of building houses. To suggest that we have autonomy over the decisions which are being made in the Vale of Glamorgan, I'm afraid is not quite right. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, did you want to come back?
It's in relation to what Councillor Perry said about what I've said. I didn't say that I wanted house building. I didn't say that at all. What I did say, there is a pressing need for houses, especially for people on low incomes, on people that are in desperate need for accommodation. That's what really is needed, more than anything in the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm not going to say any more.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bob Penrose.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was put a question to Lloyd Fisher. In his presentation, I'm sure he made reference to an area of the Vale most susceptible to future flooding is Barry. I challenge that in that Dinas, Powys and Sully had flooded to over 130 homes in December 23rd, 2020, and yet no rectification programme has been considered as yet how to alleviate this flooding. The other thing in the plan, which I think has been missed when we're talking wellbeing, is the distinct lack of allotments, especially in my own ward of Sully, where we've been campaigning for 12 years and still haven't been afforded any allotments in spite of a long, long list. And the final point is perhaps to Councillor Wilson, perhaps he's hit the nail on the head by admitting that the Vale of Glamorgan Council hasn't built hardly any houses itself, and isn't this the type of housing that is required, reverting back to what affectionately used to be known as council houses, rather than affordable houses, which really aren't affordable because of property prices, in spite of housing associations taking 40% ownership, they are still too expensive for people on council housing lists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Penrose. I've got Councillor Sandra Perks. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please, Chair. Sorry, I had problems then, just getting myself to operate the unmute button. I think, you know, what other members of the committee need to realise that we also, the Vale of Glamorgan Council, the housing section, also works with social housing as well. So within Barry, we're going to have new houses built, and it's mainly one-bedroom homes that we actually need. So the houses that are built in the Western Vale that are bigger than that is not what's required of the actual counting list. The majority of people need a one-bedroom house, a one-bedroom property. So if you look within Barry, you'll see that brownfield sites are being used to rebuild properties. There's old pubs that are being converted into one-bedroom properties. We've got a big homelessness issue. Most of the people who were on the streets before the COVID pandemic had to be housed. So we've housed those, and they need to go into properties now. And I think you'd all agree, we don't want people back on the streets. We want people to go into properties. So there has been stuff built on brownfield sites. And I would say it's the developers who are wanting to build, as particularly in Cowbridge, if you look at the big estate there, who sold them that land. It wasn't the Vale of Glamorgan. We don't own that sort of land. I was going to say that, you know, we would build more council houses, but we had to actually sell off lots of council houses under previous Westminster governments said we could sell the properties off. So we've got a shortage of council houses. We're just starting to rebuild them within the Vale, which I'm very proud of, that I'm actually on the Housing Scrutiny Committee, and to see the properties that have been built for for people who are ready to go back into work, who've been homeless. If you see the ones on court site, the temporary accommodation there, people are getting all sorts of support to get back into work. And they're so well thought of that other local authorities want to come and have a look at them. So the Vale of Glamorgan is doing things right. We're trying to do the best that we can. We always work hand in hand with other housing associations and like that to get people off the list, but we haven't got enough properties and more needs to be built. And in some ways, if you think about people have been outpriced in the Western Vale, the local people who want to live there, who want to stay near their families, need to have social housing to live in. So they need to have the greenfield sites or the brownfield sites there so they can build houses so people can stay in their local community. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perks. And I've got Councillor Aviett, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what my colleague Sandra Perks has just said, and I just want to say that I really do hope all the people who are complaining about social housing, I really do hope none of your family ever gets to be in that situation. People are homeless through domestic abuse, all kinds, redundancy, bereavement. And I really do hope, and I'm just hoping you are going to have like a change of heart sometimes, because it could be one of your own. And obviously we don't want to build on the greenfield sites. And the other thing, Councillor Perry, if you would give the addresses of these places in Bonvilston, I'm sure myself and as Sally Hanks has said, we'll take that forward, because I really don't believe that's happening. I really don't believe it's council property. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Aviett. I think Mike Cuddy, Bob Penrose, I think those are historic hands. So I think we've just got Rob Thomas to come back, please.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I'm just mindful that Councillor Robertson posed a couple of questions, so it would be remiss of me not to try my best to answer those. In terms of the current work undertaken on the LDP, Councillor Cuddy is right. Anyone can get involved in that, and it is a process by which we're reviewing the performance of the LDP up to date and where we need to take it in terms of its direction of travel. So the opportunity exists for everyone to get involved in that process, and Councillor Cuddy is also right that the best way to get involved is at the outset when we're looking at the strategy, when we're looking at the direction for that plan, because often when it gets to drawing lines on the map in terms of where things go, that strategy has been worked up and we're getting into the point of detail at that stage. Councillor Robertson also referred to the Corporate Joint Committee for South East Wales. That is a new tier, if you like, of government in Wales that has been introduced by Welsh Government. There are 4 corporate joint committees going to be in operation across Wales. The one that's relevant to the Vale is the one that covers the South East Wales Cardiff capital region. So in brief, that is Bridgend to the west to Monmouthshire in the east, from the Vale in the south to Merthyr in the north. The good news is that key decisions in terms of proposals for new development that normally would go through our planning committee do not change. So the function of the planning committee, which is to determine proposals for its local area, will remain with the Vale of Glamorgan Council, as it will with any other local authority. The role of the Corporate Joint Committee will be to look at planning at a more strategic level across the region, and that will be done alongside considering key transport infrastructure and economic development issues across the region. So the need to deliver a local development plan and the need to determine planning applications won't be removed from a local level. So that will remain. And in terms of house building, I agree with the comments made that the council is in the position at the moment where it's building its own housing again, which is good news. That has been ramped up over the last couple of years, and the proposals that the council has is to develop even more housing to be retained within council ownership, so that it can be assured, if you like, that the housing is delivered in areas where it's needed and goes to residents that need that housing, and it'll be developed and designed in a form and to a size and scale that is required in those particular areas. A number of members of the Vale Council, Councillor Aviat, Councillor Perks, has already made reference to the fact that the need in Barry, for example, is different to the need in Penarth and is different to the need in some of our more rural communities. So what the council is doing and will continue to do is to assess that need and to build the types of homes that is needed in each particular area, and that won't be uniform. It will differ according to the area of the Vale. I think Councillor Penrose made a comment about flooding, and I'm going to take a punt on this one, but I suspect what Lloyd was referring to in his presentation was future risk of flooding, not current. And I think the reason Barry is mentioned is because of the rise in sea level, I suspect, and that is why Barry in particular is going to be potentially more prone to flooding in future. And I think that concludes the points that I picked up on, Chair. Hope that helps.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Rob. I think we've got one last question. Did you want to come in, Councillor Barnaby? And then we'll ask Tom to sum up.
Yes, please. I just wanted to really make the point that I don't think I heard anyone say they were against social housing. What we were against is housing on greenfield where they were brownfield. I, for one, was very much involved with the LDP. I, in fact, had time off work to actually attend the inspectors' reviews, and there were very few people there. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much consideration to suggestions that in our case in St Athan, where the Defence College had highlighted some land on the what now is the enterprise zone for accommodation, could not be used for accommodation in building houses rather than a farmer's land. Unfortunately, nobody took that up. On the affordable housing front, I don't want this to be a tick box exercise. I've questioned some if they're for rent with a housing association, that's fine, but this 70% is all very well when you build in these houses where probably other houses would not be built. But they could be sold, and they could be just sold on the open market and no longer be affordable. And for certain, when you ask the price, they're not really affordable. I don't own a house. I couldn't afford to buy a house on a single salary. And so I'm not one of those wealthy people that's just broaching on about everybody else. I'm just a realist. Those houses are not affordable. It's a fallacy. But they are getting permission to build on greenfield land and in places where there's no commuting, there's no bus, there's no good access to transport or jobs. So I do think the joined up approach does need to be looked at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnaby. If I can come back to you then, Tom and Lloyd, and if either of you want to come back on any points, and then we'll look at the recommendations to be passed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Rob for coming in on the flooding issue. He was absolutely right in terms of the analysis is about the future risk of flooding. I've asked Lloyd if he'll pull together some information that we can circulate to members, just drawing attention to the specific references within the reports and any additional data, and Lloyd will take a look at that tomorrow morning, and he can certainly cover off the questions from earlier around the specific industries of fishing and farming, and give committee members and Town and Community Council some further information on that, as well as the flooding query from Councillor Penrose. I don't think I need to come back on anything else relating to the planning discussion. I think Rob had covered those points. to those colleagues who have flagged access to services such as GP surgeries, that is something that would be covered within the Regional Partnership Board, which is a board with health, ourselves, housing and the third sector to cover as part of their area plan. What I can do is make sure that a copy of that area plan assessment, which has been consulted on or is out to consultation currently, sorry, I'll make sure that we circulate the link to members and to Town and Community Council representatives so you can have a look at that. And we'll also make sure that the notes of your meeting this evening, Chair, are shared with colleagues there so that that can be used as part of that assessment. And finally, in terms of things like the conversation around the point that Councillor Penrose suggested in terms of additional allotments, we'll certainly be able to use that as part of the consultation question around what we should be focusing in on in the future. It certainly is something that, as part of Move More Eat Well, which is a Public Health Wales plan, access to good quality, locally sourced and grown food is really important. So thank you for that, and we'll make sure that a copy of the slides is also provided to colleagues in Democratic Services so that members can have those as well.
Can I also ask, Tom, that you can, will the link to the survey be with that presentation so people have got easy access to the survey as well?
It will be now, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much. OK, I think that leaves us all. Councillor Perry, is that a historic hand or can we move on?
Yeah, I just want to come in quickly and say I completely agree with what Councillor Anne Barnaby said. There's no hostility here towards council housing, and is one of the solutions that needs to be put forward. And it'd be great to see the Vale of Glamorgan increase its housing stock. So no one's spoken out against that. So just to be clear, that is the situation here. OK, thank you for that. It is a very difficult juggling act, and the Vale have been quite proactive with so many homeless people, and the houses that have been built in Court Road have been looked on very, very favourably by other local authorities. So thank you very much. OK, the recommendations then, after all the notes have been taken by Lloyd and Tom, and we have had a lot of feedback here tonight. The recommendation is that this committee consider the draft wellbeing assessment and advise the PSB of their views regarding the content, structure and conclusions detailed within the assessment as part of the formal consultation process. Are we all happy to go with those recommendations, please?
Yep.
I can't see any hands, so we take it that has passed. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. Can I remind Town and Community Councillors that request for consideration forms are available from Amy, and that the date of our next meeting is the 27th of April 2022. So can I thank you all for attending tonight, and I hope you've all learned a little bit more. So thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you, Chair. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.